the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show. Can AI help us be kinder and more empathetic in our communications? That's the topic today. I'm Stephen Skash here once again with Tulio Siragusa and Ashmar. So my son works in the urban forestry department at for the city's Parks and Rec department, and he just did this event with all kinds of trucks and things like that. And so they bring all these trucks and bulldozers and stuff out to the city area there, and then all the 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds get to climb in and honk horns and play with them. And he's telling me how he goes, yeah, all these 3 and 5-year-olds, they like know every single thing about these trucks, and I'm all, this was you when you were little, and do you realize you're living your dream job right now? You get to climb into these bulldozers and you get to climb up trees and do all this stuff. But when he was young, I don't think he realized what he'd be doing. For me, when I'm young, my job didn't exist. Digital marketing didn't exist. And so when he was young, AI wasn't part of anything really. He saw it in movies, maybe like Iron Man or something like that, but it was always just this thing that was out there. But now it's kind of integrated in our jobs and what we're doing. We're starting to see that, the past year and a half, 2 years, that it's really just becoming part of our daily work life. So that's the question today, is to talk about how AI is going to help us be kinder and more empathetic in our communications, because I think it will. There may be some issues along the way with this, integration of this. But, judging by how some of us talk to our Alexas or our Siris or things like that, who can really say, if it's going to work out that way? Because I think some people can be a little verbally abusive. And, when that robot revolution happens, Tulio, they'll be the first ones they turn on, don't you think? They'll be taking notes on all this.
Absolutely. Actually, I think they could be part of the therapy of letting all that stuff out sometimes.
Alexa therapist version where
absolutely. They need to develop a therapist where you just yell at it and just let it out, or they proxy for someone that you're really upset with and want to have conflict with them, so they'll just proxy. Maybe they'll even make their voice, and then just talk back to you, and you can just hash it out with the Alexa, and then come to a peaceful place, right? And then you can go talk to that person from a place of peace because you worked it all out with your AI bot, something like that. I mean, I'm joking, but it's actually something I think could have a lot of value.
I was going to make a joke too. The variable that has to be coded in is don't take anything they're saying personally. They don't mean it.
Right.
Right?
It'll be noted on that remark.
Have zero emotion about it. It's all about supporting them to let it go. You don't have to have these weekends where people go and just smash stuff and hit sticks on the ground and yell and scream. I could just totally see like robots and AI showing up to these things and just like facing someone, and you just pummel them just to get all your aggression out, and they don't fight back.
You're the first one. You're the first one on that list. You're the first one on that list.
Because let's face it, as much as we're empathetic, there's also this dark side inside of us that just kind of is in there. So you need to have an outlet. I think AI could be an enabler to that outlet. Just let it out.
Robots nice. Treat your robots kindly. This is a practice in life. I don't know. I think for that to work, though, you've got to be able to give the robot lots of context, because I think people will be like, robot, you don't know my life. You don't know what's going on. How are you going to help me in that situation? Like, I don't know. It's got to you're going to have some deep, long conversations with that for it to get some context on what's going on in your life. But that then evolves into this sort of creepy area, I think, that people are like.
Well, see, I think it's creepy to us, but some of the newer generation, they don't think it's creepy. I mean, already we have perpetually connected devices that listen to everything that we do, whether we realize it or not. It's happening. It happens.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of enabling a feature that says, okay, at the end of the day, give me a recap of where I lost it, where I could have been more empathetic, where I could have been kinder, maybe play back something I said, and give me pointers on how I could have said it differently. So it could be a really great training tool, speaking about, how we can use AI to help us be kinder, because most people don't react that way because they just naturally default that way. It's, you get triggered. So, but the more awareness you have of those triggers, if you had something that was like an assistant that was with you all the time, it's almost like a therapist full time with you, and just gave you a recap at the end of the day, that could be a really great application for mental health, I think. Or just good,
in general.
mindset.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. I think people are thinking maybe of that red, the red light in like HAL in 2001, just taking notes on how many times you just told me to shut up today here.
Or it just chimes in and says, you did not just say that. Oops, sorry.
I'm setting boundaries right now.
or it jumps in the middle of a situation that's escalating. Okay, everybody settle down. I'll play mediator now. That can actually provide some really good applications,
Yeah.
No, the voice of C-3PO. I mean, everyone will be like, okay.
Don't pull on that trigger yet.
Yeah, C-3PO might be a good sort of example of maybe it'll be offended. It'll be offended a little bit, like, how rude, It won't totally.
Now, if they put like personalities in AI, we're screwed, because like sometimes Alexa just starts talking for no reason. No one said anything, and everybody's like, shut up.
Yeah, noted on the list.
Even my little one's like, Alexa, be quiet. It's like, nobody called you.
So is this helping build kinder people or not? I mean, if you're going to abuse your robots, you can get away with telling it to shut up or whatever. That doesn't sound healthy.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. So what types of areas can AI help us, infuse empathy into? Let's talk about some scenarios here. Tulio, how might it work? Like, what I know you've used it to help you in certain areas. What
I use it quite frequently. I mean, all joking aside, sometimes there are some difficult conversations that need to be had, or a difficult email. And you might be emotionally attached to the circumstance and might write it with some passive aggression. It just naturally happens that way, right? So that's not going to be conducive to actually creating connection. And I've often gone to AI. I've written it out the way I would have written it, and I say, okay, can you help me write this where it's kinder, more empathetic, gentler? I don't want to come across as aggressive in any way. And just some amazing tweaks and tunes that came out of that. I was like, wow, that's such a better way to say this, right? Especially in dealing with either a conflict with a team member, or a team member that's kind of not pulling their weight, so to speak. Maybe you have to help address an issue where you want them to get more active and more participatory, or just writing to a customer service center about a complaint about something, right? There's the saying, you get more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. So AI can help turn the vinegar into honey to a certain degree. So I use it quite extensively, just to make sure that I'm infusing the right mindset, that my intention is matching the words, because sometimes the intention is there, but for whatever reason, we all have some traumas, issues that we carry with us. And unknowingly, sometimes that's fused into the words that we say. So it's just a great way to kind of like reflect back, what's the better way that I can say this, that I intentionally want to say it. And then I look at it, I was like, yeah, that is a better way to say it. And I get into that state of mind. So it helps me not only write it right, but trains me to rethink and reposition how I would do it. So it's a great tool for that. And I use it quite regularly. In fact, I have it on my phone where I just speak to it and say, I want to say this, blah, 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 blah. And it'll type it out, and then I'll read it. And sometimes I'll just use what it says. I'll use that to speak to someone. It doesn't have to be everything written, but I use it as a training tool as well as an editing tool to infuse the right mindset.
And to piggyback off of that, to Tulio's point, I've caught myself in scenarios where I've had to send emails where I'm actually frustrated with the person I'm communicating with, whether it's a client or a team member or so on and so forth. And I had the intent of saying, I know I'm frustrated. I could tell the tone of this email is giving off that impression. Let me take it to AI and see if we can make this email kinder, right? And it's always giving me those great responses. But ultimately, though, to all of our points, I think it starts with the person. The person has to have the awareness that their intent is to be kind. and maybe they might not be able to communicate in an effective way. Maybe it's just not their skill. They can rely on AI to do that. I think there are other factors as well, as a lot of times, again, each person's different. There are certain people that have that shadow character that has way overtaken them, and they're not even really thinking the awareness. There are other people that get to that point because they're just extremely stressed. They have timelines, deadlines, work piling in, a lot of busy work, research work, and maybe they haven't integrated AI into their lives yet, or this is pre-AI, right? So a lot of people's dramas and frustrations are just from the fact that they're just so stressed out and they just react or blow up because just too much is going on. And AI alleviating some of that stress by just taking out some of those tasks and creating more space for people to have time for reflection, meditation, taking care of themselves, self-care, and so on, could also benefit in creating a more kinder populace. So there's those two factors there. One is the intent of the person. Number two, just alleviating stress just by default will be able to create kinder people. But with that said, it goes back to the person. You could just be someone who, there was this video, I don't know if you guys saw this on the internet, but there was this chat GPT where they combined it with a robot, and the person was on his laptop, making responses to people, but people didn't know where he was. So he was like talking on the robot. So people would talk to the robot. He's typing up the responses from GPT. GPT's responding. And this homeless person came up to the robot and says, "Who are you?" And then he's like, "I am a chat GPT, whatever robot." And then out of nowhere, the homeless guy just picked up the robot and slammed him on the floor for no reason. And the video went viral. It was hilarious because of the reaction, right? But that's an example of a person that is just so broken that, that poor robot had no chance, right? Even if it could have really helped the poor guy or helped the guy in general, the poor robot became a victim of a hate crime. So it really goes back to you internally as a person. Do you want to be a kinder person? And AI can help you get there.
Also times have changed and expectations have changed. It used to be you were trained to sit on something, sleep on it, and then look at it again the next day, right? Now, the times have changed. People expect a response faster. So if you don't respond fast enough, then someone goes into this mindset, oh, they're really upset, right?
Yep.
So you kind of have now the situation where you can't even afford to just sleep on it, make sure you look at it again the next day, see if you feel the same way. So to a certain degree, AI helps to sort of bridge that time that you would normally give yourself, because it gives you the immediate reflection of like, this is probably how you would say it tomorrow, right? Why don't you just say that now? But I love this idea of this guy who slammed the robot. He probably figured, let me just get rid of the Borg before it starts assimilating all of us.
Yeah, he was just, on the front lines of the war there.
It was hilarious. He just punches the poor robot trying to have a conversation with him. And he just immediately goes, boom.
Now you raised a good question. Does a AI bot, does that qualify as a hate crime if I start beating on it?
There was this this was back in the day. Joe Rogan had a podcast about this when people were integrating. I think they were putting the glasses on. This is before Neuralink, all those conversations. And they were sharing that there's going to come a time potentially where people integrate with robotics and become cyborgs, right? Where if they had something attached to their heads, and this is during the time when Google was creating augmented reality. So they were saying that there might be a new series of hate crimes where people are against the cyborg people, and that could become a big issue, right? Now, obviously, I think we bypass that because AI is taking over. Neuralink is a new thing, so no one's attaching things to themselves. But I'm sure you guys heard recently, there's been a human test on Neuralink, right, where people are actually putting software into their brains and able to move things around as they're thinking about it, and that's a different revolution. So in terms of hate crimes, if robots actually become sentient, then that could become a thing, or we merge with the robots and there could be a segment of the population that thinks that's evil, another population that thinks that, no, this is evolution. So
I think the closer the robot gets to being human, the more absolutely offended we will be by how it's treated. So, I mean, that's almost like a whole nother show, is just there will be people who will abuse them in ways. And at some point, 100 years from now, I don't know how long, where you just looking at someone, you maybe couldn't quite tell, it's like at a Blade Runner and you're looking for the replicants or whatever. It's just, you won't be able to tell. And there'll be that line where it's just like, no, that's not cool.
It makes me think of that movie Hostel, that sick movie Hostel. Imagine they did that to the robots.
Yeah.
I mean, just the fact that someone would have that kind of aggression is probably in itself a problem.
Well,
Even if
it's interesting on the fact that we're talking about film over the years. I think the Wachowskis with The Matrix, They ended up creating an animated series that was a prequel to explaining how the robots took over. And it was exactly that point. Robots integrate into society, AI integrate into society, and people were treating these robots poorly. Now, there was a segment of the population that was working with them, but then there was another segment where eventually the robot stood up for itself and it became this massive issue. The robots then colonized, they're trying to create their own population, trying to work with us, and we just weren't having it. And this was the whole series. So this was sort of already kind of discussed in the past, and it's really eerie that we're kind of going into that direction. And I can imagine a world where robots do end up becoming like humans, and there being a civil rights for robots, right? So it's just like, it's interesting to think about.
iRobot, whatever, they're going to just
iRobot's another one, yeah,
take over or whatever. So we've always had that in there. I mean, but let's get so the here and now, though. That's probably a ways away. You guys have mentioned a few.
Hopefully
things.
that's ways away.
Hopefully, right?
Yeah, no, there's someday there'll be just this robot outside my window just staring in at the house. I think that's when we're all just going to lose our minds.
Yeah.
How does the audience know we're not robots right now? Just
Right.
Yes, I know. Well, that'll be easier to pull off, I think, is this sort of virtual, which they're already doing, right, with virtual spokespersons, things like that.
Yeah.
But getting back to kind of this, just the topic, a few things you guys mentioned. One was, I think, those hard conversations or those emails. Like Tulio said, it used to be, hey, write what you want to say, but put it aside and come back to it later. And then you come back and you iterate a kinder version. Usually it's like, okay, I got it out. So I think, with time being an issue now, you'll be like, probably pounding out some of that same thing, and you'll take a pause, take a beat, and say, you know what, let me just throw this in to something and make it just a little bit kinder. Read it, feel better about what you're sending. So there's that aspect, I think, that people are using it for right now quite a bit. There is, like I said, the hard conversations with employees or vendors or clients. You might not know how to approach those conversations, might not be totally skilled in that area. So I think you could just go to ChatGPT and say, hey, this is the situation. How should I approach this? And it'll come back with several key things that you'll be like, oh, this is perfect. Yes, I need to do it this way. And it will be a very kind, empathetic approach to it whenever you do that. So I think that'll be another way we see it. And then I think, Ash, you also mentioned sort of that the fatigue aspect, the stress aspect. So there was a study from University of California, San Diego that found, well, AI generated replies didn't reduce the time doctors spent responding. They helped alleviate the cognitive burden by providing that, this compassionate draft that physicians could then personalize. And so it took them, you didn't need to use quite all the brain power to get to where you wanted to get with this compassionate draft of your correspondence. And so they found that this AI has potential to reduce the burnout and improve the quality of that physician client or patient communications. So basically you can kind of see it in use in this regard, where it is, if you're stressed and you've got to communicate something, especially in that type of business where it's very sensitive and you have to take a beat to just not move on to your next patient or your next thing, and you're just backed up with stuff, and you just got to be present and give the respect to this patient. That AI, they're finding that, this could be a very useful tool.
I'm actually thinking there's an opportunity here, both for Google and for Microsoft, to actually incorporate some kind of a feature, particularly for corporations who subscribe to their email platforms, that would basically any email going out would basically go through some kind of a filter that would either trigger an alert to the sender saying, hey, you want to tone this down or change this a little bit, or depending on the permission level that the user gives, it could literally go and make changes. Because to a certain degree, if an employee sends a flaming email to either a client or a vendor or a partner, it does reflect on the company. So it could actually hurt the company's reputation. It's not just that individual. So there could be some benefit to institutionalizing using AI to create more kinder, gentler, empathetic messaging, even in emails. I think there's real life applications for doing that. I don't think that would be too complicated to do. I might be giving away an idea here, but
no,
but
I've got this as a point to talk about as this alignment of company values.
Yeah.
So if you all have maybe your core values, plugged into this, and someone's dealing with a vendor or something like that, or a client, and it's not aligning with how your company speaks, AI should be able to come in there in some part of this process and say, hey, a couple tips before you send this, let's do this and this to align with the company values. And I think that's a pretty huge deal, especially when you get to maybe stuff like customer service and stuff, where it can be this emotionally charged issue that comes up, and you may have ways to deal with that, but you've got to make sure those ways are uniform across the board, right, with how you want to approach it. So I think that's one of the things that they're finding too, is with like chatbots, they can take people along this process, but then when it gets to this sort of really emotional issue, the chatbot can generally do a pretty good job of maybe helping there. But, at some point you want to speak to a human probably in this when you've got a severe kind of issue. And then on this side of it, with that customer support, it should be able to be like, hey, here it's listening to the whole conversation. It's understanding where the problems are, hopefully. But it's also providing you with, hey, here's 5 things to talk about or to address in this process, to make sure the person's feel heard and all these things. So it could make sure that your process is very uniform, I think, and aligned across, your customer service rep to customer service rep.
I agree. I think there's a huge application, even in customer call centers, where it's listening and then it would pop up a suggestive response. It might even give feedback to the representative about whether they're being too cold or not warm enough. Sometimes you call
so sentiment analysis that AI is doing that sentiment analysis right now. That
ongoing training, and it's not coming from another person, because sometimes people respond negatively when a supervisor or someone addresses something like that, because it's very personal. But having something that you set the parameters and it gives you feedback, hey, maybe perk up a little, smile, you sound cold, maybe not exactly say it that way, but the point is it could really help maintain a certain level of kindness and empathy in all communications with customers, and provide feedback to you as well. Because sometimes, someone might be tired or didn't have that cup of coffee, whatever, but you speak to someone on the phone and it's like they make you feel like they're doing you a favor. And you're like, come on, I'm a customer. I have a problem. Help me. And they make you feel like it's a chore, such a big chore to help.
And
you just feel deflated. Like, what kind of customer service is this? So, having something that helps that individual say, hey, this person's being pretty genuine, maybe warm up a little bit, something like that, could be very beneficial, I think.
And Tulio, those people are the ones who are going to be replaced by AI in the call center kind of scenario.
True. That's
right?
True.
Because they've already done studies on this. It's like, hey, which do you prefer, this interaction or this interaction? And AI has now been beating the humans, just because you run into that person for whatever reasons, just either not listening to you or not responding in a nice way, or just feels like, they've got better things to do than talk with you.
They invite you into their dark hole and suck you in, and you're like, I don't want to be in that dark hole with you. I'm sorry. It's sad that it happens, but that's a problem for a customer service center. And so, to a certain degree, it's like you're on call, you're on notice. AI will take your job if you don't show up in a way that's empathetic and kind to the people you're working with. So maybe it's a good time to check in with it and give you some tips on how to warm up. I don't know.
Yeah, so it can do that sentiment, like we're talking about. It can do that, and it's doing that now. Like, you'll see that in meetings where it'll come back and tell you kind of the sentiment analysis, or give you some discussion on the tone and how everything went. So I could see that in like a job where you got a lot of reps, right? So you're getting reps in it doing this sort of thing over and over. And it's kind of maybe scoring you, or it's just providing you with feedback on, hey, on your last 100 calls, Here's where you were weak. Here's where you were strong. And ideally, two of those areas is like kindness and empathy. And you'll sort of be saying, okay, I need to improve on this and this. So when you're getting those reps in, I think that's where this AI infusion can really help us, is with the reps, where it's starting to train.
Yeah.
It talks to also something, I don't know if it was the New York Times, I forget, but where I saw it, but there was an article about the biggest threat in terms of job roles is actually not the day-to-day workers. It's the leadership and the CEO, because to a certain degree, what do I need a manager for? It's to help me, guide me, make sure I got the right feedback, that I'm doing my job properly. AI could do that very effectively, more effectively, and it can be done almost real time. So you can course correct real time the customer service person or someone responding to an email. I don't need to have a manager for that. I can have AI manage that for me. So there's a certain degree of efficiency and also accuracy that will come from it that can help make leadership more effective in communicating, more effective in training. And again, it's this idea, kindness and empathy will help people learn more than just, here's how we want to get it done. So if you're in leadership and you're not using AI to help you fine tune your approach, the way you speak, the way you write, because it's the biggest threat to your role for those who don't adopt it, of any other threat that's ever existed in the past. So rather than look at it as a threat, look at it as a companion, a partner that can help you level up the quality of leadership you provide. I really believe that's where it's going to provide the most value in the short term.
So, no, to Tulio's point, you're right. I think AI can replace leadership. I think that's why it's so important as a leader, if you're in that leadership position or a C-suite position, to have that connection with your employees, really have that relationship. But as you know, most C-suite, most leadership people are not in the business of having relationships with their employees. They don't know how to communicate emotionally or connect with empathy. And those individuals will be replaced, especially when a robot can manage your employees better than you can. So I think people will always want to connect with people, but people do not, or employees will always want to connect with people always want to connect with people, right? But if people or the person on the other side is not someone that is nice or has the empathy, then they would want to talk to the robot, right? That has that empathy, that understanding of their needs, right? Because when you're a tough leader, and we've talked about this in the past, when you don't have empathy, you have that duality, you're treating your employees a certain way, of course, you're going to pick the robot over you. But if you have that connection and you have empathy, then they're going to want to speak with you, because people want to connect with people. So yeah, you're right. This can change C-suite. This can change leadership roles. And I think leaders should, catch on with that. Hey, build a relationship with your employees so they pick you over the robot. So that's my thought process.
You said something interesting about people wanting to connect with people. Someone who was like a cold sort of clinical type of leader would be called it's like speaking to a robot. That was the expression, right?
Yeah.
But now, since AI is so much more evolved than anyone could have ever imagined, it's like, I'd rather speak to the robot who's got some training on how to speak to me empathetically than to speak with a human who's actually should be more like the robot. It's kind of a weird thing how it's all come full circle. But at the end of the day, people want to be able to connect with people who understand them.
Exactly.
And whether that person's an individual or some machine that's programmed to understand them, because really they just want to feel validated, like what they're saying is actually important to somebody else. And so if you can create that, which is what empathy is about, right? So if you can receive that through a program, through a robot, or through an individual, of course, the individual is going to be always the preferred method, but people will levitate where they're going to get it. And so if you're in leadership and you're kind of like the old school robot, it's, without feelings, people will levitate to get help somewhere else, and AI is going to facilitate it for them. And you'll turn out to be a dinosaur instead of a robot if you don't evolve.
100%. I have a quick story to share on that. There's a reason why I stopped flying with Frontier Airlines. And I remember this specific moment. And ever since then, every time I think of Frontier Airlines, I think of this traumatic experience I had. And it was the fact that I arrived to my terminal. I had to go check in. I was waiting in a line, and 2 minutes before I was supposed to actually check in, I was supposed to push a button on an app that said I was checked in, but I didn't do it. I was 2 minutes late. 2 minutes late. The gentleman who was running the front area told me, "I'm sorry, sir, you're 2 minutes late. You cannot board on this flight anymore. You're gonna have to take the next one." I said, "Okay, well, only 2 minutes. I mean, the terminal's right there. I could just walk in." It was San Diego too, of all airlines. It was right there. So I tried to reason with the gentleman, but he was so dry. He was a robot. And the question was, "Okay, well, when's the next flight?" He's like, "Well, we don't have one till tomorrow." It was noon. I'm like, "Wait till tomorrow? Where am I going to stay? Where am I going to sleep? Where should I?" "Well, you could just sit over there till tomorrow." At least an AI would have been like, "Well, here are your options, sir. And I'm so sorry. Here's the reason why we can't have you on," right? Like, at least have me be heard. But that experience was so bad. It left such a bad taste in my mouth. Every time I even see that airline as an option, it's the cheapest flight, best time, refuse. Because that was an awful experience where I actually talked or spoke to a human robot that killed my experience.
So I think that could have been an advantage for the human in that scenario, because they could have, been kind, empathetic, maybe bend the rules a little bit. AI, maybe if it's not empowered to bend the rules in those situations, you'd be equally as frustrated on the other side of that. So this sounds like, this could be one of those areas where this could be a limitation of the AI too. Even it's a limitation of the human side, but it could also, I could really see the flip scenario on there being just equally as frustrating. And so to me, that sounds like, if you just had a better human in that scenario, that they would have saved a customer for sure. So that's really one of those areas where generative AI may come into some issues, is just replicating the gray areas of that human interaction that we can sometimes just the rules and stuff.
Now, on the other side of that person, if they had AI, they could have gone and said, "Please hang on, let me check something," right? And they could have typed in, "Person's 2 minutes late. What should I say here?" Right?
Right.
And AI would have been like, "I'm so sorry you didn't make it on time. Unfortunately, regulation does not allow us to open the gate anymore. We wish we could, but it's a regulation thing. The next flight's available tomorrow at noon, which kind of sucks. What we could suggest is maybe help you get on another airline, or maybe find a local hotel nearby." The program would have probably given some kinder, empathetic response, which would have still been a no, but it would have been a kinder no. It would have pushed it to the fact that it was a regulation thing. So it would have taken the pressure off of themselves as an airline and put it back on you to a certain degree, right? But it would have been in a kind way, put it back on you. So that's actually an example where AI could have helped save a client.
100% to your point. You're right. If that was the conversation I had, I would have been upset with myself. I'm like, okay, well, lesson learned, right? But in this case, it seemed like they weren't bending. Again, to your point, that there's so many better ways. There was such a better way to respond.
But you should have feeling for it. Even if it was your fault, it doesn't matter. The fact is, it doesn't take anything to say, "I'm so sorry that you couldn't make it, but I can't open this. I'm so sorry." Just, you gain so much by doing that. But sometimes people are so much in there. That's the beautiful thing about the program. The program doesn't have feelings, didn't have a bad morning. Didn't get enough sleep. It just consistent. It's consistent. And that's the gift of that. So, companies can adopt it. And if these are ways that you can adopt it right now. This is not a future thing. It can be adopted right now. Just put it in place. And there are plenty of companies out there that are actually helping to implement AI, generative AI solutions like this into enterprises. So it's not pie in the sky future stuff. It's happening right now as we speak.
So what do you guys think about the potential for problems with our growth as humans with leaning on AI as a crutch, or leaning on it too much? We've talked about the benefits of how, if you get reps in a certain area, that it could help you, train yourself to be more empathetic, to be kinder. But thinking on the other side of this, what if we're using it more as a crutch, so we aren't going through the mental processing that we need to. So this is like a relatively new phenomenon, AI. So its impact on the human brain. This is an emerging area where we haven't really studied yet. So when I think about it, I think about evolution as being this process of transcending and including a part of what came before. So, like an atom can a bunch of atoms, and you can create this molecule, something new. Molecules, you can create something new, like a cell. And so it's just becoming more complex. So it's transcending and including. But as we get more complex with that, as far as organisms and systems, you kind of get new problems like cancers and things that are introduced into this process. So, we had the cell phone, a social media, and, we couldn't have predicted what kind of, issues those would bring up with, various addictions and whatnot. So we just don't know. So I'm thinking about the brain functions here on us leaning on AI, on the bad side. So we talked about on the good side, we talked about that reduction of the cognitive load, right? So, with the doctors and whatnot, so that you've got the prefrontal cortex, I think, is where it's this higher order thinking and decision making that would just be involved in that process. And so you're reducing strain. So this sounds good. You're able to reduce strain and be able to spend more of that energy towards something else. But on the other side, what about us not flexing those muscles that help us, interact with humans? Or, could we become more robotic, like that person that you ran into, just because we don't know how to interact with people as much anymore? I'm thinking 10 years from now, who knows? With people growing up with this.
You brought a really great point. I've seen this issue sort of in the workplace. I think it's also being caught up in academia, high schools as well. I mean, a lot of education is being affected by this. AI is a tool, right? And if you already have a collaborative nature and you're able to collaborate with this AI as a tool, you're one thing that people can't forget, that's critical thinking is still one of our most valuable assets as humans that we have, right? And if you eliminate critical thinking completely and you're not using it as a tool with a collaborative approach, I've seen this happen where people they're lazy and they just want to throw in and hope the AI will get it done for them so they can move on to something else, and they're not even really checking their work, or they're not correctly prompt engineering. They're just throwing things in, having it spit back out. It's coming out robotic. I think people need to be educated on how to be able to use the AI and how it should be used. And right now there is no education. It's brand spanking new. The world doesn't know how to deal with it. A company like OpenAI came out of nowhere and put together this product, and they have no intention of, I don't know if you guys recently saw the interview with the CEO of OpenAI, where he was like, we have no profit model as of right now, but once we get to a point, we're going to actually ask the AI, how do we make this profitable, right? And it's going to give back to the investors. But the reality is that there is an issue there. And unless there's an educational piece of how this should be utilized correctly, people can become more robotic and put out less quality work. I don't know if you heard recently, there's now a prompt in Google search where you can eliminate any content that's been produced after 2023, because the argument is that all the content now is all AI made and not even accurate, and it's all robotic and messed up, and people want authentic information that's real. So that I could see that becoming a huge issue and some regulation coming into place. But again, it goes back to education. And until the academic environment adopts AI as, hey, this is the new way of life, they have to educate us as humans on how to best use it. Only the select few that know how to use it correctly are going to become the future millionaires, billionaires. But once it gets brought into academia, that time is over, right? So the individuals that actually are using it correctly, collaborating with the AI, still leveraging critical thinking and asking the right questions to be able to solve problems that they can't solve by themselves, those are going to be the future. These are the people who are going to be capitalizing on that in this period of time. But at some point or another, I think we're going to run into that issue. People are going to become robotic. It's going to be brought up to the world. Congress is going to talk about it, and it's eventually integrated to education on how to properly use this, knowing that we're now evolving past doing things on our own, that we need to work with AI if we want to evolve as a species and society and so on. So to your point, I see it a major issue that's going to bring up a solution. But during this time right now, if you know how to use this AI correctly, you can achieve a lot during this period. And I think it's going to be a missed opportunity for those who are just waiting and not leveraging or even working with it, or at least learning how to work with it.
I think over time, it will have to adopt to your personal voice so that it captures your own essence somehow. And if you use it long enough, you can it now, especially with the new ChatGPT for the I think it's called.
Yeah,
It
4.0, yeah.
memorizes preferences, so you can actually train it, and with that, it starts to remember who you are and your voice. But beyond critical thinking, before critical thinking, curiosity is the key to everything, right? So you have to have desire and curiosity, and so when you prompt it, it's coming from a place of curiosity. And if you maintain that curiosity and then you read it as a way to educate yourself, you can actually enhance your learning dramatically, which enhances your critical thinking.
Yes.
The danger is you're curious, you get the information, and you just spit it out. Like you skip the step of integrating the information, making it your own, and then putting it out.
Yes.
That's a critical step that must continue, or we will lose the critical thinking. So and it's very easy to not do it because you just get the content and you put it out. But I've been very disciplined personally to make sure I'm curious. I read, I learn from it. I'll challenge again. I don't necessarily agree with it. This is how I see it. And then I'll infuse it with my own thoughts, right? But that's a symbiotic kind of relationship, and it requires investment. So what comes out of that is actually something that represents who I am and what I want to say, right? With the insights and intelligence of the collective intelligence from massive amounts of data, right? So it really comes down to the individual agency to maintain their curiosity and their agency and their voice, because you can very easily just prompt it and then robotically put it out. And that's not going to do anybody any good, especially if you put it out and someone comes and talks to you about it. You can't even talk about it because you don't remember, because you didn't integrate it. So it can be used to learn more, to grow. So it's a desire for human beings to grow. So I think it can actually aid in growth. But ultimately, I think it needs to be adopted to the voice of each individual. So it's going to be unique to what we do. And that's going to take time.
Yeah, for sure. I think the adoption of the voice will be, that's something that a lot of AI is doing now. But I think at some point you could get something out very quickly and it'll be perfect. And it keeps giving you something perfect again and again and again and again. So now it's like I've got reduced sort of activation in these brain areas of, that usually I'm normally processing some of this. And if it keeps giving me that thing that's just perfect again and again and again, this is where I see potentially you've just got either skills that atrophy or parts of your brain that just aren't going to, mature maybe the way they should, or go through those reps the way they should. I tend to lean toward it's going to train us. We're going to see examples over and over again of good behavior, and that will train us. But I could also see just this other scenario where it's just giving you something perfect again and again and again and again, and you just, you just end up, okay, I'm not doing that activity anymore. Something else is, because it's crushing it.
But in that case, if it's a repetitive activity, maybe it's not that important. Like, for example, think about how many numbers we used to remember before smartphones. I used to remember probably 100 different numbers in memory.
Yeah.
Now I have maybe remember 2, and the rest I'm relying on the machine.
Pushing
my fingertip. So
pushing back a little bit on that was kind of not a meaningful activity as much. But it's so sophisticated now that it could give you these perfect things that were actually meaningful activities for you previously.
Yeah, so it remains to be seen. That could be a problem. Like, there was a movie where everybody was like a blob and they were jacked into the computer program. I don't remember what that movie was. It was kind of surreal, where everybody lived through this virtual reality and they were all just in their couches, like a bunch of blobs.
I think I know what movie you're talking. I don't remember the name, but I know exactly.
Yeah, it was bizarre.
Well, they had like Wall-E, where you were in these little just scooters because you didn't, they're pushing you around everywhere and you didn't really move too much because so much was being done for you. I could see
everybody was like 1,000 pounds just sitting in these things,
Yeah, and I could see that in sort of this, in the cognitive area of just being a little bit lazy about certain things.
I think that's a real risk. That's an absolute real risk. I don't know. I think that's going to require some guardrails, some ethics around how far can it go, and where does it push back to make sure you maintain critical thinking. Or we'll have a society of a bunch of really just kind of like unable to think for themselves individuals.
Yeah, it's hard to predict where it'll go and what kind of new problems we'll have. We just don't know. And so that's kind of the scary part of a lot of this is we just don't know. And so
There could be some good to that too. Maybe less crime, less wars. I don't know, but it's definitely an interesting thing to keep an eye out for. So
yeah, this is why like our focus on a lot of what we're doing is trying to build love into what you do, trying to build empathy into your advertising, just because it's this sort of foundational moment, right, of in AI where I think we need to set up some of these, guide rails for how AI should be interacting, how we should be using it, and making sure that it's kind and empathetic and that we're becoming kinder and empathetic in the process. And so we just, like you said, we just don't know where it's going to go. But I think if we just when you don't know what to do the loving thing, right?
Well, the good news is we have a guest coming up that's actually the founder of AI 2030, which is a think tank out of Washington, D.C. designed to make sure that AI is for good. So that'll be an interesting conversation to get his take on this, because there are actually people thinking about this and doing something about it and gathering, try to make AI something that benefits us, not takes over for us.
So a quick programming note, we've now got our Empathy Expansion Kit series running. And in our quest to help build more empathy into business, these 10-minute bite-sized episodes that are airing every Wednesday morning. And then additionally, as Tulio mentioned, we have multiple guests lined up. Our interviews air every Thursday. So look out for those. And Tulio alluded to one coming up. So we will dive into all that on the next Bliss Business podcast.